Good evening, and welcome to NASJA's Professional Development Seminar, which is being held today, January 30th, 2005, and is a reprise of the very popular Professional Ethics in Journalism panel that we featured in 2004, some of the same guests returning. And we will continue that conversation as it relates to what is going on in the present state of journalism in the United States and in North America, and how things are shaping up for the future in the world of sports across a multitude of disciplines, including, of course, snow sports. Tonight, we're going to be talking about a very relevant and important topic for all journalists, whether online or in print, and that involves the ethical considerations that go into covering stories, how they're written, and how they're distributed. And Jay Flemma, an attorney who is now residing in Boise, Idaho, is going to, for the second time, moderate that panel. As I said, it was very well received the first time. And Jay, please continue and let us know who's gathered tonight.
Thanks, Charlie, and welcome, everybody. This is the second annual ethics lecture that NASJA has been sponsoring. We're hoping to make it a yearly event because the topic is so critically important to everything we do as a journalist. Our reputations are our stock in trade and the most important thing that we carry with us for our entire life. And our ethics are what define us. And we've got a panel tonight of all-stars. As I look down the list, these great folks that have given their time for us this evening have between them close to 130 years combined experience of journalistic excellence. And to be perfectly honest, we couldn't have done better if we'd have tried to pick the four nicest people in the media tent as well. So very quickly, I'll run down our lineup. First, returning for the second year in a row from the Vermont Digger, the lady who broke the biggest scandal in winter sports history, the EB5 scandal. Everyone say hello to Ann Galloway, who is emeritus at the Vermont Digger.
So nice to see you all. Thank you.
Also returning from last year, a fellow who's covered any number of Winter Olympics and practically every sport ever created and has been to, I believe, every continent except Antarctica to cover sports. From the New York Daily News, Filip Bondy returns. He's waving at us. Puckish as ever. Well, we can also give a big hello and welcome to a buddy of his from the New York Daily News, making his first appearance. He's a 10-time awardee from the Golf Writers Association of America. He's won a Lifetime Achievement Award, and he called the Super Bowl, predicted it correctly pre-season within 1 point. He called Green Bay 31, Pittsburgh 24, and it was Green Bay 31, Pittsburgh 25. Welcome Hank Gola, who should have known the Steelers would go for 2.
Yeah, let's not talk about this year's picks.
And finally, from the New York Post, one of the great sports writers. He started out as a kid who wanted to do this job and done really, really great, including books on the bestseller list. My favorite baseball book of all, in fact, The First Fall Classic. Please give a warm welcome to Mike Vaccaro of the New York Post.
Good to be here, Jay.
All right, so welcome everybody. Very quickly, I'm the moderator. I'm not going to have any opinion. I'm just going to try to lead the debate hither and thither. But I do want to give us a bit of a framework. And this is for everybody, all of us, whether you're the greenest influencer or the most seasoned veteran Hall of Famer. We don't have rules that were taught to us in journalism school. Those of you that went, I didn't. I started out as a blogger. But Jim Lehrer, the great broadcast journalist, along with his partner, Robert McNeil, wrote an informal list that I would like to read to you because it is so critically important to our practice. Recite these words as though they were a wedding vow, because as long as we follow these rules, no matter who we are, we'll be fine. I practice journalism in accordance with the following guidelines. Do nothing I cannot defend. Do not distort, lie, slant, or hype. Do not falsify facts or make up quotes. Cover, write, and present every story with the care I would want if the story were about me. Assume there is at least one other side or version to every story. Assume the viewer is as smart and as caring and good a person as I am. Assume the same about all people on whom I report. Assume everyone is innocent until proven guilty. Assume personal lives are a private matter until a legitimate turn in the story mandates otherwise. Carefully separate opinion and analysis from straight news stories and clearly label it as such. Do not use anonymous sources or blind quotes except on rare and momentous occasions. No one should ever be allowed to attack someone else anonymously. Do not broadcast profanity or the end result of violence unless it is an integral and necessary part of the story and crucial to its understanding. Acknowledge that objectivity may be impossible, but fairness never is. Journalists who are reckless with facts and reputations should be disciplined by their employers. My viewers have a right to know what principles guide my work and the process I use in their practice. I am not in the entertainment business. Quite simply, that's what it means to be a journalist. That's the commitment the craft expects. I'll turn it over one by one now to all four of our speakers for an opening statement and some thoughts. So, Anne Galloway, take it away.
Oh, thank you, Jay. I love the Jim Lehrer list. It's really thorough and humane. It sort of takes the SBJ list and humanizes it in a serious way. I'm really pleased to be with you all. I have a pretty narrow focus. I don't have the kind of broad, kind of portfolio that the rest of these great sports journalists on the team have, but I did go deep on one story that Jay mentioned, which is the Jay Peak Resort. And that scandal kind of ended up with Pacific Group Resort International buying Jay Peak in 2022 for about 30% of what investors put into it. So they bought it for 76 million, and it the investors had 250 million in it. So there was a lot going on there. A lot of money has appeared along the way, and that's what I reported on last year. The state, although the state of Vermont settled with the investors for 16 million for their role in helping to perpetuate the fraud. So that's my little bit for tonight, and I look forward to hearing what everybody else has to say on this very important topic.
Yeah, we'll definitely be getting into how to cover difficult topics and how to get answers out of people who don't want to give you answers. Let's pass the baton next to Filip Bondy.
Hello. Yep, great to be here. I thought, one thing we should, I think, differentiate here is the difference between media law and ethics, right? I mean, one is very clear, plagiarism and libel, that is law. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about something a bit more gray area with ethics. And I think ethics, we have our own ethics. We have our company's ethics that we have to consider. We even have our country's predominant ethics that we have to consider. And I'll give you an example of that. 1994, Lillehammer. I was covering that Olympics in Norway, and the great Norwegian cross-country star, Vegard, I believe is how you pronounce his name. He had a competition interview session, and one of my good friends, Bill Glauber from the Baltimore Sun, did something that Americans do. We ask people how how do you feel, right? And in this case, his brother had disappeared 5 months earlier while skiing on the mountains. And Bill asked as nicely as he could, how does that affect you going into these Olympics? And Vegard just completely collapsed. He sobbed. He broke down. And the next day, Bill found himself on the cover of every Norwegian newspaper as the great villain who caused the Norwegian superstar to break down before the competition. It is not something that European journalists generally do, is ask, how do you feel about that? This is a very American thing. And, we assume that it's, as you just read the rules, one of the things he said was personal lives are a private matter unless it becomes relevant. Well, this seemed relevant to us Americans, but not to the Norwegians. You were not supposed to do this. I'm just pointing out the gray areas here and how we have to be aware that different cultures have different ethics as well. Anyway, that's my lesson for the day.
Well, that's a fantastic observation. We'll definitely get into that as well. Let's pass the baton now to one of our first timers from the New York Daily News as well, a compatriot and a partner in crime of Filip. Hank Gola joins us.
I can't follow up, Filip. I never could. That's why he was paid so much more than I was over the years.
Not that much.
Now's a chance to get even.
I was in newspapers for over 40 years. I started at the Passaic Herald News, which was a suburban newspaper, which acted like a big city newspaper back in the day. And I ended up at the New York Post, the New York Daily News. And before I was unceremoniously let go, along with Filip and some really other great people in the Great Purge of 2015. I understand how Lehrer's rules could be out there and considered by people coming into the business, but I didn't need Lehrer's rules. Follow your conscience, use common sense. I could distill all those rules into those two things. That's it. Be a good person, know what you're doing. And that's how I never followed any rules. I just went along and did my thing. So maybe other people need rules. I didn't, but there you go. I also felt that I got in and into the business at the right time and out of the business at the right time. And I don't think the especially sports writing. I can't speak for the other sections of the paper, although there are no papers anymore. But I really feel that it's kind of changed. And Mike Vaccaro's on this call. I think the New York Post is maybe one of the only newspapers that still acts like a newspaper. I mean, they send people everywhere. They spend money, and great for them. But everyone else is almost like, I mean, the New York Daily News, who I still freelance for, is basically a newsletter now. The Chicago Tribune, the great broadsheet in Chicago, look at what they've been reduced to. So yeah, that's kind of my feeling. I got in at the right time and out at the right time. And I kind of feel sad for what the newspaper industry has become outside of ethics. But that was my rule. I didn't need Jim Lehrer to tell me this and that. I followed my conscience and used common sense.
Well, not only is that terrific advice, but it's a perfect segue to our next guest panelist, Mike Vaccaro of the New York Post.
Thanks, Jay. Hank is right. We are very kind of by ourselves with the way we cover things. Still, we still send 5 and 6 people to the Super Bowl. We still send 5 and 6 people to the World Series. It's unusual. And, you know, it used to be one of the great things about working at the Post and doing, you know, having a job where we did all of those things is that every time you would go to the Final Four or the Super Bowl or the World Series or the Masters or the US Open, it would be like a reunion of sorts, seeing all the other people doing your job at other papers. And really one of the depressing things over the last 15 years is how smaller and smaller those reunions became because just fewer and fewer people were getting the assignments. And that's really kind of a jarring thing to think about. But, you know, the thing that really struck me about those Jim Lehrer rules is how prescient he was. I'm going to assume he laid those down, you know, 20, 30 years ago. And I'm not sure that in that moment he had to deal the way a lot of us currently have to deal with the separation between journalism and entertainment. You know, a lot of our daily competition now comes from podcasts, come from bloggers, and I think that most of them would tell you that they're entertainers first and journalists second. And you know what? If you're going to appeal to that market, you got to do something a little extra special with your journalism work, or else, you know, it's going to get hidden. Bill Simmons is a friend of mine. I think what he's done is one of the great success stories in American journalism. But the problem is that every 22-year-old aspiring sports writer that I talk to wants to be Bill Simmons. Well, two things. One, you're not as good as him, probably. Two, I mean, his was really a needle in a haystack success story. And the fact is that Bill Simmons, if he had to be, would also be a very good journalist because he knows people when he talks to people. That's just not necessarily what his role is right now for The Ringer and for Spotify and for the things he does there. So, but you know, I think we do have to remember more than ever that we are not entertainers. We're journalists, and it's a different standard that we set for each other. It's a different set of ethics we set for each other, and it's a different product that we produce.
Yeah, Mike, I want to bring up very quickly something that Jay mentioned the last time that I think is really pertinent to that and what Filip said about entertainment and about Bill Paley at CBS sometime in the 70s deciding that the Platinum Standard News Division would be basically underneath the entertainment division. Do you see a reversal at any time in the future, any of you guys and Jay, of that trend? And has sports always been kind of in the crease between those two?
I'll
views?
throw out this observation, Charlie, that as long as you write with an original, passionate, and observant voice, never forget, writers aren't born, they are taught. And even though they may start out at different levels and not that good, and like Mike said, with inexperience, with time, who knows? You could grow up to be the next Jenkins or the next Vaccaro, Gola, Bondy, or Galloway. Mike, you struck my heart with something else that you said as well, talking about the camaraderie amongst us journalists. You know, there's something special about that, walking into the media center and seeing old friends that you've developed not only a friendship with, but a real care for and concern for. Those of us in the golf world, for example, are bemoaning the loss of two of our brethren. We lost Steve D'Amelio and we lost Jeff Babineau as well. And so we cherish these friendships in these times. We're underpaid, but we're overprivileged, as Hank Gola would say. So great observation there, Charlie. Let's move to our first question of the night. Let's take up the topic of dealing with a really difficult story. And perhaps the best example of that will be the winter sports story that Ann Galloway was referring to earlier. And I also invite Mike and Hank and Filip, after Ann talks, to talk about the difficult stories that they've had to cover. The EB5 story in Vermont basically goes like this. The owner of Jay Peak, legendary, okay, fantastic mountain in the northern part of Vermont that's spoken of in Holy Whispers, the owner died, and all of his knowledge died with him. And so the family decided to sell. They had a CFO named Stenger. And Stenger was friends with a fellow named Ariel Quiros, a rich businessman, a foreign national, who had a condo on the side of Jay Peak. And first, they decided they could make some money by offering to the owners a team of Koreans that would buy the mountain, but that fell through. And so Quiros and Stenger basically entered into a scheme to defraud the owners, whereby, with a flick of a switch, and by releasing $16 million of EB5 money that was an asset of Jay Peak, releasing that money 8 minutes early and circling it around the globe to 7 or 8 different other banks, Quiros was able to pay the owners of Jay Peak off with their own money. And then he began an EB5 scam to the tune of close to $450 million. It works like this. If you're a foreign national and you give $500,000 to a depressed area, you get to cut the line for citizenship. And so they started selling EB5s like hamburgers at McDonald's. And they started building things. They built the Jay Peak Hotel and the Jay Peak Golf Course. But at the same time, some of the money was being siphoned off for fur coats for Mrs. Quiros, for apartments in New York City, for ritzy vacations. You get the idea. After many years, some of the investors started saying, hey, where's our citizenship? But all the people in Vermont could hear was the promises of Quiros. They saw the Jay Peak Hotel get built. They saw the golf course get built, and then they thought, okay, he's producing. And he promised them a nanotechnology center that would turn a small town called Newport into a huge, bustling city. To this day, still, there's a 9-block wide hole in the ground. Anne broke the story, and for her diligence and hard work in her teams, they were vilified by the senators of Vermont. They were vilified by the New York Times, who said she can't possibly be right. Well, she was horribly, horribly right. And a lot of people lost a lot of money. So Anne, take it away from there. Tell us about your experience covering this most difficult story.
Wow, well, thank you for that great summary, Jay. Yeah, I mean, I got involved with this story in 2012 after Bill Stenger gave a whopper of a press conference that was in 3 locations in the Northeast Kingdom. And it started at the Jay Peak Hotel, in which he promised the people of Vermont and investors that he actually wanted to sell even more EB5 credits, and he wanted to build $1 billion worth of projects and bring in approximately 10,000 employees to the Newport NJ area. So that was the big game. They had already spent $250 million on Jay Peak, and they were looking to build a lot more. They wanted to build a terminal at a local airport, an office complex in Newport. They bought the Mountain Resort, where Michaela Schifrin cut her teeth, and they were going to build a $180 million athletic center there, et cetera, et cetera. There were many projects, including this biotech center in Newport, which is right on the Canadian border. And so this big pipe dream sounded just like what it was to me. And I immediately was skeptical. It just sounded too good to be true. I mean, there are only 60,000 people who live in the county where this thing was going to be built. So it just didn't make sense to me that they would ever have the infrastructure to bring in 10,000 employees and so on for these projects. So I rushed back to the office and I wrote a quick story, but I turned around a proposal to the Fund for Investigative Journalism and asked them to support some research. And so we began the Odyssey. I hired an intern from Columbia University. He took a hard look at some of the projects which were sponsored by the state of Vermont. And eventually I said to our intern at the time, you just wait. In 2013, you know, a year from now, the first investors don't get their money back, there's going to be a hue and cry. and it seems rather unlikely that they're going to get their money back, even though Stenger had promised at that juncture that they would get their 500,000 K plus a return. He promised a return of 5%. So August of 2013 comes around. The investors don't hear anything. They're rather upset. And but they don't reach out to Stenger until January of 2014, and they start pounding him. They're like, dude, where's our money? And this goes on for months, and they got no response. And finally, they did get a letter from him that said basically, hey, we're not going to give you your money back right away. In fact, what we're going to do is we're going to extend the time period by 9 years, and we're going to turn this into a balloon loan, and we're going to pay you back in the 9th year. Well, there was a hue and cry. And the 35 investors in the very first project, the Tram House, which is what Jay was talking about originally, the money that these investors had put in escrow with the originators, that was Mount Zanzibar International, that was used to purchase the resort. So the money that was available for the Tram House was actually stolen from the investors who were supposed to be involved with Hotel J and so on. It was a Ponzi scheme. Basically, they were trying to attract new investors in order to pay for the projects that they had already started. And so the Tram House investors were disgruntled, and they had reached out to state employees for help. And the state employees had roundly rejected them. They told them to go back to Bill Stenger. But there was finally one honest guy who told an acquaintance of mine that the investors were complaining. And I reached out to him, and he was willing to talk with me. And at any rate, long and short of it is, I was able to find out who the investors were, and I reached out to them by email. I called them. I reached out to them on Facebook and Twitter. I spent a couple of weeks just, every day reaching out to all 35 of them because I knew this was a huge story. I just had a feeling, so finally, it was July 4th weekend, and one of the investors called me, and he said, we think we can trust you. We've looked at your website. We know you're small. At the time, VT Digger was, it was very shoestring. There were basically 10 of us on staff, and it was, hand and mouth. And at any rate, he said, we think we can trust you. We're going to give you documents to show that we've been ripped off. And so they did. And in the meantime, another reporter and I were placing public records requests because this whole project was supposed to be under the aegis of the state of Vermont's Commerce Agency. And they were supposed to be keeping an eye, on any potential problems. Well, they weren't. They were asleep at the wheel. And in fact, they were promoting the projects hand in glove with Stenger. So this is how it started. I wrote a couple of stories to begin with. Of course, interviewed Stenger, got his side of it, but he was quite upset when the first story came out because, he, as Jay mentioned, he was like a god up there. There's always more snow at Jay Peak. They lie about that too. Okay, so just
I'm not so sure about that. There's plenty of snow at Jay Peak.
there's plenty of snow, but they always inflate it. So at any rate, Bill.
Yeah. So tell us about the blowback. How serious was the blowback you got, and how did you deal with it?
Well, the blowback was immediate. Bill Stenger came to our tiny offices in Montpelier, Vermont, and wanted to correct the record, and he was unable to do so. I mean, we asked him if we had made factual errors in the story, and he couldn't point to any. And he was very red in the face, cried several times. I mean, Hillary Niles, the reporter who was working with me at the time, she and I were worried that he was going to have a heart attack. His face was red. He was all upset and wobbly. And any rate, he made it down the stairs without incident because we had an upstairs office at the time. But it was tough. And then, I had said to him, look, if we've made mistakes, we want to know what they are. Think about it. Obviously, if we've made errors, we want to correct them. And if you disagree with the piece, please write a commentary, which he did, and we published his commentary, but he couldn't point out any factual errors. And then the state of Vermont, the head of the Commerce Agency, also wrote a piece backing up Bill Stanger's point of view. And the governor's office, which was deeply involved in the whole charade, really went to town on us, intimidating us. Bill tried to, it tried to sue us. They had the biggest law firm in Vermont send us, a couple of letters telling us that, at one point we were looking into something and they said that if we wrote about that question that they were going to sue us, et cetera. So there was a lot going on there, but I knew that that meant we were really onto something. It's a little counterintuitive, I realize, but and we had the backing of a very important resource on our team. We had an attorney, Tim Cornell, who had been involved in vetting our stories from the beginning. And so he really helped us make sure that we were belt and suspendering every piece, that we were already doing that with the team, but, he really took it to the next level and made sure that we weren't getting out over our skis, as they say. Yeah,
So
that's
tell
long
us a
story
little
short.
bit about the comeback, okay? When finally did the New York Times and everyone else realize they had egg on their face?
Well, I mean, the New York Times had written a number of puff pieces about Jay Peak because, Bill Stanger, he's a great salesman, he really, and whether he convinced himself of some of this stuff, I don't know, but he saw himself as Robin Hood and he's sticking to that story even now. But eventually the SEC got involved, and in point of fact, they had been investigating since 2013. And I think that our reporting helped to, I like to think that we helped to accelerate their timeline a little bit. But they were all over it. And in April of 2016, the SEC brought charges against Stenger and his partner, Ariel Karos. And, there were 52 counts of fraud, and including misuse of $50 million worth of misused funds and 200 million plus of they didn't know where this money went, actually. I mean, I don't think they ever really figured it out.
So it
I
seems
know. So
like it seems like having that good team around you of, the lawyer that could help advise as a second pair of eyes, okay, a dedicated team of journalists on it, and solid documents and facts, that really is the best way to fly directly into the face of a difficult story.
we were fortunate. I mean, we had documents, and it started with the investors, and we were initially able to get state records, but they shut that off pretty quickly. So it became more difficult with time as the fraud kind of blew up, because what happened was in 2014, they ran out of money. It's kind of ironic, they had brought in, said 450 million, including the administrative fees. But Keros was spending it, and he put $180 million of it in margin loans on on Wall Street. So it was a mess, and the contractors weren't getting paid, so they were up too, and they were leaking as well. So there was with a lot of business degrees, you're kind of out in the cold unless there's a lawsuit, or unless there's a huge leak. In our case, there was never a leak straight out of J-Peak, and they were tight. And the contractors really didn't say much. They were mad, but they weren't willing to say much. Most of what we got was from the state. Yeah.
Now
I
there's
I
there's
know that Jay wants to move things along. I'd love, Jay, if you could come back to Anne.
well, hang on a minute. I've got the perfect transition, Charlie.
Well, let me ask a quick question. For the future, is how your experience informed the way you perceive the coverage of the ski patrol strike out in Park City.
Let's come back to that, Charlie, because the true transition here that's perfect to get back to everybody else is that one of the other important skills that Anne demonstrated there was dealing with the people as well. And that's an important skill for a sports writer because you're dealing with egos. You've got athletes' egos, you've got PR people who have egos, you've got managers. So let's pass the baton over to Filip and Hank and Mike, and also talk in the same vein about dealing with difficult stories. How do you deal with the difficult people and the difficult stories? We'll start with Filip because if I recall correctly, you've had a couple tussles with Steinbrenner.
Yeah, but that's not the story I want to tell. If you're talking about difficult people, I'll tell you a story about the most difficult people I've ever dealt with. All right. So no, let me finish here.
Okay.
All right. So anyway, I was working as a columnist at the New York Daily News, and I get a phone call from our sports editor, Vic Siegel, and he says, I just got a column from Howard Cosell, and who was working as a columnist for the New York Daily News in his latter days. I don't know how many people remember that. And he said, I just got this column, and it says that John McEnroe has checked into a drug rehab center in Beverly Hills. And I said, well, I don't know, because I cover tennis, but I don't know. What do I know? And he said, well, I need you to check it out. So so I happened to be in Los Angeles covering the NBA finals. And Vic said, well, who's going to always be at the Laker game? John McEnroe. So I want you to go down to wherever John McEnroe is and ask him if he's been checked into a drug rehab center. So, all right, not an easy task for, the man with the most famous temper in sports history. And so I'm just praying that John McEnroe isn't at this game. Please, John, do not come to this game. Well, not only is he there, but they put him on TV, right? So there's no out for me at all. I have to go talk to John McEnroe and confront him about a drug rehab center. So he's sitting courtside, and it's halftime, and I go down there, and he's sitting with Vitas Gerulaitis, who, by the way, had the greatest quote in the history of sports. You know that quote, anybody? It's he had been beaten by Jimmy Connors 15 straight times. And
nobody beats Vitas Gerulaitis
16 times in a row after he finally won. So anyway, I go down there, and I say, I decide, well, the only way to do this is to use Howard Cosell as the guy, as the medium, the guy in the middle. So I say to John, who kind of knew me from covering tennis, I said, John, I hate to bother you, but Howard Cosell has written that you have checked into a drug rehab center. Is there any truth to that? And he says, well, you can go tell Howard Cosell to go to hell. So I said, all right, that's all he's going to tell me. So I go back and I get on the phone to our sports editor, and I say, give him the quote, John McEnroe says Howard Cosell can go to hell. And Vic says, well, that's not good enough, is it? We got to really know if this is true or not. You're going to have to go to John McEnroe's house and follow him to see if he goes to a drug rehab center. And I say, well, I don't know where John McEnroe lives. And I was not about to, tail his car to a drug rehab center. But what I did do was I went to the drug rehab center, the Beverly Hills Drug Rehab Center. Okay. So I went there. And when I arrived, I found that there was a sign on the front door that said it has been closed for the last 6 months. So, he was not in this drug rehab center. Was he ever in that drug rehab center? Quite possibly. But the idea that we would have published a column by Howard Cosell saying that he is in a drug rehab center that is closed was pretty dangerous and pretty reckless by Cosell. And I think it's an example, of something, a bit of celebrity journalism that we see probably more now of than we ever did before. But back then, Cosell was a celebrity, and in most cases, whatever he said or wrote would just immediately be out there. Luckily, we fact-checked it, and we killed his column. And that was the story of one of the more unpleasant stories I've ever had to deal with. I think there are some ethical questions in there, right? I mean, you do have to get the other side of the story.
Well, let's start with, how did Howard get that story in the first place? There must have had to have been an explanation. Didn't you go to him and say, where'd you get that from?
Well, I think, he might have heard something that had taken place a year ago or half a year ago or 2 years ago. Somebody said something to somebody, playing telephone. I don't doubt that John McEnroe was ever in a drug rehab center. I mean, were plenty of rumors about cocaine use and whatever else.
And he was a guitarist.
That's right. That's right. But I do think, that this was an example of somebody just throwing a story out there without making the effort to find out the facts, or without the effort of talking to the other guy.
What was it like, the balance between the editors and Cosell? Because Cosell was such a huge name and a larger than life personality. Can you take us a little behind the scenes on how they massaged the relationship between Cosell and your editor?
He had an ego unparalleled. I remember I once was in the office and I answered the telephone, and he said, I picked it up and I said, hello. And he said, hello, young man, don't be nervous, but this is Howard Cosell. So, that was his perception of himself. So yeah, we had to deal with that in the office. And, I think he was thrust upon us more than anything. I mean, it wasn't as if our sports editor wanted him to be our columnist, but look, he was a big name. He might sell newspapers, which is always a big thing. And so we had to deal with him. And
like when ESPN took Hunter S. Thompson for a while.
Yeah, but he's more fun.
Don't say that to our friend John Garrity. Poor John was a rookie writer, and he had the job as a rookie of following Thompson. Oh, we got to get him next year for a speaker.
You really should. I think I've done my 2 terms of an office here.
Let's pass it over to Hank and then to Mike. Your thoughts on how to deal with very difficult people on very difficult subjects.
Well, it's funny because when I was at the Post, our sports editor, our assistant sports editor was Greg Gallo. The sports editor was Jerry Lisker. But Gallo was kind of the guy that would ride herd on you. And when Lawrence Taylor was dabbling with cocaine or whatever it was that he was doing, Gallo actually suggested that I pose as an orderly and kind of get into the drug rehab center where he was staying. But I didn't do that. but he actually mentioned that as a suggestion. I think he just thought, well, maybe he's going to bite on this. But yeah, pose as an orderly, I would have had a bedpan and looking around for Lawrence. But I have a very unusual background because my first beat was the Cosmos. And I was at the Passaic Herald News. I hadn't graduated yet. I actually had to finish 22 credits in my last semester to get out. And I had been a part-timer there doing high school sports and the like. And the Cosmos, because they were moving from Yankee Stadium over to the new Giant Stadium, they were just seeking publicity, and they went to every suburban newspaper in New Jersey, and those in New York too, the Westchester papers, for instance. And there were a bunch of them. There was a Patterson News. There was the Elizabeth Journal. There was papers all over the place. Those were the glory days. And they said, okay, look, if you cover us, we will pay for your guy to go on the road with us, all expenses. I mean, the plane, the food, the room, the whole thing. Just cover us, and that'll be it. All they were looking for was publicity. So I was offered the job, a full-time job, to cover the Cosmos, and I wasn't into soccer. Phil was a wonderful soccer player back in the day. East Brunswick probably has a monument to him when he was playing there. But I grew up in Garfield, and I played baseball, and Garfield was a baseball, football high school, and but they had a lot of foreigners, and they all played soccer. So the American kids played the American sports, and the kids who were coming over from Poland and Italy and whatnot played soccer. But okay, yeah, I'll do it. If it's going to mean I'm hired full time, I'm in for it. So I ended up on the Cosmos beat, and it was the greatest thing I have ever covered in my entire career, because you could write anything and they would just lap it up, because as long as the Cosmos were out there, you could do anything. You could write anything you want. And I know Mushnick and at the Post, they would love the back pages. I mean, this was like 1977, and the Yankees had Billy Martin, and they were putting Cosmos stuff on the back page because it was just nuts. So that's how I broke into the business, covering the Cosmos. And then all of a sudden, the whole supernova came apart, and unfortunately, and okay, well, soccer's pretty much over. And they put me on the Giants. And now you're in the world of the NFL. And believe me, back then it was right now it's ridiculous. Back then, I mean, if I could go back and back then it was kind of, you could do anything you wanted basically, but compared to the Cosmos, you had your time. And now I was in the world of the NFL. I've come to the Giants, and now I've got Bill Parcells to deal with. And Parcells was a guy who wanted total control. And I remember the story. And it was Phil Simms and Scott Bruner. There was a quarterback controversy, who was going to be the starter, all of this. And Parcells' brother, of all people, gave me, I don't remember I wish I knew the particulars, but I'll just generalize. He gave me a scoop on Phil, about Phil thinks this or that about the whole thing, and I wrote it as a source, because I didn't like using unnamed sources, but when you have a source like this, the brother of the head coach, I mean, you go with it, right? And so I wrote it. I forgot what it was, but it wasn't even a big thing. I didn't really make a big deal of it. I actually think I put it in the notebook or something. I didn't really emphasize it. And Parcells' first game, I think they played the Eagles, right? And after the game, he says, "Hey, I want you in here." And he says to me, I wish I remembered the language, but he kind of threatened me because he was a little bit of a bully, which I didn't, whatever. And he said that, there are no sources, I know what it was. There are no sources close to me. But it was just the contrast going from the Cosmos, where anything went, you know, they would yell at you. I remember you'd write something about Canalia, and then you have this raging argument. He'd be screaming in your face, and the next day you'd be going out for a drink with him. It was crazy back. Philip, you know, the soccer was totally different than anything else. You know, it was just bizarre. It was bizarro world. But then, now I will go back to something Mike said in his comments about the entertainment, the blurry line, and I'll trace that back to the advent of sports talk radio. That's when everything started to change, because now
About what year are you talking, Hank?
outside, right? We
About
were
what
on the inside. What?
What
Sorry?
year? About what year is this?
Mid-80s, I guess, when WFAN started in Francesa and the Mad Dog and the whole thing. And so now we were on the inside, and then I would basically go outside and get in the car and turn the radio on. And Francesa was saying stuff that was totally wrong, because I know what's going on, and he's just bloviating. But this was getting people like the Giants upset, because he was putting out stuff that he was just hearing, like Cosell. Cosell just heard. Cosell wasn't a journalist. Somebody just told him that. So he said, oh, great, I'll put it in my column. That's what happened there, I'm sure, Philip, right?
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah.
Right? Somebody told him, like, hey, okay, I'll put it. Okay, I'll write it. Like today, they just throw stuff against the wall. They just tweet stuff here and there. That was the start of it. Cosell was Cosell was ahead of his time, right?
It's well ahead of his time. Yeah.
But that was the start of it. When sports talk radio started in the mid-80s, everything changed, and the relationship between teams and writers changed, because before then we were trusted. And when they came out and everything started, and then we all got put into the same kind of barrel, and then teams looked at us with more distrust than ever. Like, I'm not saying anything to him. And that's when you started getting the restrictions, like, only a certain amount of time in the locker room, blah, 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 this, that. I remember.
We also got pressure from our editors to match these stories that they heard on the radio.
That's exactly right. Right. I'll get into that later, because it's not only the difficult stories that you got to deal with, the difficult people, it's the difficult people that you've got to deal with, who are your editors. You're getting pressure from up top.
So let's talk about that relationship too. How do you deal? What do the very best journalists do when they're faced with a furious editor or furious?
I'm going to give you a great example. I don't mean to monopolize this, but this involves Philip too. He'll remember this. So the Daily News basically has a liberal slant, and the Post basically has a conservative slant. Now, Philip, I actually described him once in a column I did as a resident Marxist, but I had more of a conservative slant, right? So if you remember the whole Martha Burke controversy with Augusta National,
Yes,
and that they had no women members and all of
Yes.
this, right? You remember the whole thing.
2003.
Martha Burke had this whole crusade, and she was going to force Augusta National to take. What she ended up doing was actually prolonging it, because Augusta National was ready to admit a women member, but when she did her whole protest thing,
The famous
they said,
quote,
well,
I will not do it at the
screw you,
point of a
we're not.
bayonet.
Yeah, the point of it, Hootie Johnson. I'm not going to be forced to the point of a bayonet. Okay, so going into Augusta that year, I wrote, and I had this is the only time I had anything spiked. Did you ever have anything spiked, Philip? And stories spiked?
Not at the new. I've had things badly edited.
Yeah, no, this was totally
not the whole story. No.
Right.
No.
So here's what happened. So it wasn't even taking a side. I just kind of painted the picture that Martha Burke has no idea what she's getting into in Augusta, Georgia. She's playing on Hootie Johnson's home court, and she's also going into a place where the entire economy of the city depends on this 1 week. I mean, everybody rents out their houses. The restaurants are full. I mean, nobody wants her coming in and screwing around with what's going on in Augusta. And I just laid it out and said, this is what she's up against. Okay. I thought it was a pretty good thing because I would write a golf column every Sunday. And Leon, our sports editor, called me and he said, we can't run this. And I said, why not? I'm laying it out. This is kind of what's going to happen. I'm not even saying that she's right or wrong. I'm just saying this is what she's up against. And he said, well, we have another Martha Burke story running in the paper. And it was the big end zone. You know, it was our back then, the Daily News was a great Sunday section. It was really tremendous. And the feature part of it was the last 2 pages called the end zone. It was always a
Sure, yes, the end zone, I remember.
Right. It was always an enterprise piece, and it was a big thing. And we have someone we have the end zone. We have Martha Burke in the end zone. He says, why don't you call some players? And I am not calling players. I said, look, you either run this thing or don't run anything. I'm not calling players at this stage of the game. You know, it's already Sunday. So the Daily News runs this tribute to Martha Burke. I mean, they were falling over themselves. They actually sent a photographer down to Washington. They put Martha Burke on the steps of the Supreme Court, and she was standing like this with her arms folded, and the photo from below here was taken, you know, okay, here's the monumental woman, right? Well, what happens? The whole thing turns into a fiasco. I mean, and by the way, Philip sent down at this columnist. I'm there, and they tell me, because they know kind of my slant is here. They said, "You're just covering golf. You're just covering golf. Don't deal with this whole Martha Burke stuff." Okay, our assistant sports editor Terry Thompson goes down there with our investigative guy Michael O'Keefe, and they're down there. And they're going to take the bus into Augusta as if it's the bus into Selma with Martha Burke. Like this is a big civil rights thing. Okay, so they come in and Philip's next to me, and he's going to write the stuff inside the gates because Terry and Michael O'Keefe don't have a credential. They can't get inside Augusta. And I'm the guy. My golf coverage will be by the tire ads. Right. So what happens is they come in, and then Hootie has his press conference, right? And Hootie says the point of the bayonet stuff, and then Ed Sherman, who's my dear friend from the Chicago Tribune, he asked a question, but he prefaced it with this whole thing, and Hootie says, don't lecture me, and the whole thing. So the press conference is over. And this is in days where we actually had phones, not cell phones.
Yeah.
And the phone rings, and Philip answers it, and he's on the phone, and then he gets off, and I said, what was that? He says, that was Leon. Fred Drasner says that Hootie is his kind of guy, and all he wants now is golf coverage. Anyway, that's the kind of pressure you can get from your editors, and sometimes it is misguided, and in that case it was. Because if they ran my story, at least there would have been some sort of balance in the expectations of what was going on that week. Do you remember that, Philip?
Yeah, I remember that. It was a circus. There were people. Remember some of the people who were desperately trying to be interviewed in that area?
Oh, yes.
There were some scams going on. I remember they put a couple of. Like
there was Do My Laundry. There was a Do My Laundry guy.
Where is the line between journalism and PR? Why don't we start with Anne again, and we'll go in alphabetical order.
Well, news is what people don't want to hear. And PR is the rest of it, right? PR advertising.
Okay, that was nice and concise. Philip and Hank, your thoughts on the same topic?
Well, we are not in the PR business, supposedly. We're supposed to be telling the truth, right? And PR people have a different agenda. They are pushing don't necessarily, that's not their goal, is not truthfulness. It is marketing. I mean, if you want to make it as simple as you can. Now, the better PR people are the ones who can somehow make that balance and create a real working relationship with journalists, but there is a lot of, bartering here. They give you access, you give them, a little tiny thing here and there that you did, you name the arena with the corporate name. You don't just call it Meadowlands Arena, you call it the Continental Arena or whatever, and you give them a little taste of that, they will allow you to speak to whoever. I remember the relationship I had with a public relations director at the US Open. She set me up with an interview at Monica Seles on the anniversary of her. It was not the actual anniversary, but it was a certain number of years since she had been stabbed in Germany.
Sure, stabbed in the back at the tournament. Yeah.
Yeah, and the deal was, she'll set me up with her as long as I say that the interview took place at the American Express booth or at the US Open. So there you go. You make deals like that, and both, I suppose it's win-win, but it's a compromises that everybody makes.
Yeah, the better, Philip mentioned the better PR guys, and the better PR guys, they're kind of savvy, but they will protect you a little bit. Sometimes if you've got kind of a lead and it may not be the best lead. I mean, you get tips from everywhere. You hear this, you hear that, and then you kind of check them out. And kind of the better PR guys that you can trust, right? They'll tell you, no, you're off the trail. It's the same thing when you call a GM or something like that, and you want to know. And if you trust them, then they're actually doing you a favor. And the PR guys that I really had a good relationship with, they never screwed me in that respect. They always told you one way or another where you were going, and they didn't give you information, but they told you whether you were kind of hot or cold, and so they were, they could be helpful. The novices, I mean, they're just working for the team, so they're just promoting the team.
And some of them were getting pressure from, Jim Dolan. Don't give them anything. They weren't allowed. They weren't allowed to give us anything if you were covering the Knicks or the Rangers.
Right, but I will tell, like Pat Hanlon for the Giants, for instance, who kind of rose up the chain and became a vice president. He was at a point where he wasn't going to get fired anyway, and he didn't want false stuff being put out there. And if you had a relationship with him and you came to him with kind of a lead that you were working on, if he was putting you off the trail, let me put it this way, if he was putting you off the trail, you knew that you were off the trail. And if he was not, he may not have given you, oh yeah, you're right, here, let me put you in touch with it, that's right, here's the information. But if he was not putting you off the trail, you knew you were on the trail. If that makes sense.
Exactly. And that leads to the next question of access as well. So how do you deal with a situation where you are hot on the trail and suddenly you find that your access has been cut off, or somebody doesn't like a story that you wrote?
What do you mean by access?
I'll give you a quintessential example. Okay, when we were at Shinnecock Hills and Brooks Koepka won the U.S. Open, he tried to keep Alan Shipnuck out of the media center champions interview because he didn't like something that Shipnuck wrote about him.
Okay.
Well, the Knicks.
If the guy doesn't want to talk to you, he doesn't want to talk to you.
Let me give you the example more clearly. Maybe you'll remember the incident. It was the champions interview after Koepka had won the U.S. Open. And Koepka put his manager in front of the media center room where we guys go in to interview the champion for the champions interview with the USGA. The manager was there and pointed to Shipnuck and said, I don't want him in here. And when you guys all got in there, we all got in there, Koepka turned to the USGA interviewer and said, I want Shipnuck out.
What did they do? I wasn't there. What did they do?
They didn't do anything. They said, no, he stays.
Okay.
But question I have though is, how do you handle difficult relationships like that? How do you either repair the relationship, or how do you leverage your gravitas as a writer to either regain the access or get at least access to the story that you
Well,
need?
everybody has guys that they deal with. Everybody has guys in the locker room that they go to, that there are their sources, and everybody has guys that they don't like, that they don't deal with, that they don't like, and that's your, that you work it out like you would work out anything else.
It also
You
helps.
can't force your way into a relationship with someone. You have
It
to
also
find other
helps
ways
if
around it.
it also helps if you have the support of the overriding organization, right? My son being a perfect example, he's a sports writer who covers the Knicks, and for a while he was blackballed by the Knicks when he was working at the Daily News. They wouldn't let him into the press conferences. They wouldn't let him go to any press conferences. They cut him off.
Hmm.
So what happened was the NBA stepped in on his behalf and fined the Knicks. They I mean, not that it's going to hurt Jim Dolan to be fined $50,000, but it was a demonstration that you can't do this. You can't cut an organization out of the press conferences, out of the communications loop. So in that case, he had the support. He also had the support of the other writers who would feed him quotes from the press conferences that he had been banned from by the Knicks. So, you hope that your community backs you up when there's an outrageous situation like that. But, it is, as Hank was saying, that isn't always the case. I mean, you're covering the Yankees and Alex Rodriguez doesn't want to talk to you. There's not much not much is going to happen about that. All right. So, everything is different.
You raise a great point there, Philip, and I can point to a terrific example that the Golf Writers Association of America did. You'll recall that when Tiger Woods' scandal broke, when he was going to give his first press conference, he told the journalist, "You can show up, but you can't ask any questions." And the GWAA said, And Hank, am I correct about that? That we were not going to be markers for Tiger's speech? That if we were going to show up, we were going to ask questions, and if not, we weren't going to show up?
You're talking about where he came out from the curtains?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I don't. Well, I don't recall that. I wasn't there, so I don't recall exactly what happened there. I do know that there were questions that were asked, but Tiger was deciding he was picking on who would ask the questions. So I mean, that's their prerogative too. I mean,
the other thing that's happening now is that these teams have the teams have their own networks, right?
yes,
They get to ask the questions first, and sometimes they get to ask the only questions, like Madison Square MSG Network, right? Before any of us get to ask any questions at all, the MSG Network will ask the coach and the players a series of what we consider very softball questions before we even get to ask them anything. So, they get the first priority, and that's changed a lot. I mean, when Hank and I started, these teams didn't have their own networks, and now most of them do. Or if they don't have their own networks, they have networks like ESPN, ABC, NBC that have paid a lot of money for the broadcast rights, and therefore have first priority, second priority, and third priority in asking questions to these players.
How
that's the
do
sad thing
journal?
about the demise of newspapers,
How
because
do? Sorry.
we always talked about how, I mean, this was in the 80s and 90s. We talked about, well, eventually what these leagues want to do is control all the information that's coming out. So
Well, that leads to the
and then
next
that's what
question,
happened.
which is, how do writers at outlets like that avoid blurring the lines between being PR and being journalists? When
Because
you
they're being paid by the team. That's who they're working for. They are PR. They're not journalists.
Yeah, Jay, I think you're bringing up a terrific point in terms of vertical integration and consolidation within, the media, and that this is leading to all kinds of complications that you could call access. And again, I want to bring it back around to snow sports in particular, and whether or not the monolithic, allegedly, Vail Corporation was able to control the dialogue and the coverage of the strike against it that drew a lot of public criticism for folks who were vacationing in Park City during the last couple of weeks prior to
I
the
don't think
strike.
I don't think they were able to control the message. I think it's, if you follow the coverage, there are now lawsuits brought by people who had just expensive weeks of vacation there over the holidays, and it blew up in their faces. I don't think they were able to control it because with the union striking, that always creates a situation in which you've got a corporation not wanting to say much at all in that situation for labor reasons, and then the union saying whatever they want. So it's a difficult situation, and I think it seemed from the coverage that the resort Vail didn't know it was coming, or at least they didn't tell their people, the people who were going to stay there, that it was coming, and that was part of the lawsuit. I think the vacationers felt that they should have gotten some kind of warning ahead of time. So either they didn't know or they did know and they didn't tell anybody. It's sort of hard to tell.
More than that, okay, it was the new media and the internet and social media that dominated the discussion, not articles and not the press releases from Vail. It was the pictures of long lines. It was the Facebook and YouTube stories of the patrons that were there. It was the new media setting the pace. Everyone is getting their news off of Twitter first.
So are we watching the evolution of a new system of journalism?
Oh, no question. It was 20 years ago when a lawyer from Franklin, Weinrib, and Vidal and Vassallo said to me that it was globalization, digitalization, and consolidation that are the way of the future. So I'll ask that question to our panelists. Your thoughts on globalization, digitalization, and consolidation, and how we as journalists can maximize our potential.
Not my bailiwick, really. I have
Yeah,
to
not
say.
my cup of tea either. There,
I
Jay.
will say, it's a competition out there, right? It's a grand competition, and whether it was, and as long as I've known it, we were at war with rich corporations. Okay, whether it was NBC at the Winter Olympics, where they always got the first interviews with, with Lindsey Vonn. After she won the gold medal, and we had to stand around in the cold and shiver and get just a tiny glimpse of her. We were losing that battle slowly, and I think we continue to lose it more and more. And it's a reflection of society, it's a reflection of politics, and it's a reflection of the oligarchy that we are facing, right? So I don't think it's going to get better. I can't imagine it's going to get better through digitalization. We just have big digital companies that are going to cause problems for reporting, I think, unless you are part of that digital company. So,
well, how then do you explain Stuart Winchester and Storm Skiing Journal?
I don't know who you're talking about. So somebody, maybe Anne knows what that is about.
I don't, but I'd like to learn more about that. I think that the environment is much more fractured than it was before, and that is because of digital. I worked at a newspaper before I started VT Digger, so I know a little bit about both worlds, and I lament, not taking the paper off the press every Saturday night. When I worked at the Sunday paper at the second biggest daily here in Vermont. So I more in the old days too, but I do think that because anyone can publish, that democratizes things a little bit. It's still hard to get access to the big players, as a blogger or as a digital news organization. So that power struggle continues, but I think the competition is just different now
Yeah.
than it
Jay,
was.
can you talk to Stuart's gig?
I'm sorry, Rick, what's your question?
Well, Stuart is an example of a lone wolf who has made a name for himself, who does some really good original investigative work and
Yes,
has a pretty large following.
I can answer your question then if that's what you're asking. It's very easy. He's got a niche and he's particularly good at it. His niche is weather and he's outstanding at it, and it's very important to our sport. So we only have a couple of minutes left. I'd like to pass it back to our panelists for one final word to inspire all of us, whether we are rookies or whether we are veterans. Give us your final thoughts and inspire us on, being ethical and being terrific journalists. We'll start with Ann, and then we'll go to Filip, and then Hank.
Well, I mean, journalism is still incredibly important to the American public and to our democracy. And, people don't know what is happening in the world without good journalists. And so I hope that people hang in there in this very disruptive, difficult time and find new ways of making that mark.
Filip.
I can't really add much to that. I do think journalism remains critical to democracy, and just to general knowledge, and hopefully the people out there who are reporting, the journalists, they will not worry as much about how many views they have, how many hits they have, as they do about making an impact, a positive impact on society. I mean, I know there's enormous pressure now that we did not have in my day, in terms of, nobody really knew how many people were reading my articles. Now that's all it's about. And there's intense pressure to push the envelope, and possibly in the wrong directions at times, if I could, toward the end of my career, I remember they started to bother me about how many people were reading my columns. They were very pleased when I was at a Winter Olympics, and I mentioned that Taylor Swift was a good friend of Gracie Gold, the figure skater. And, it went viral. And it was the greatest read, the greatest number of hits I ever got, greatest views, whatever. But I think we have to be careful, and we have to worry about what is right. So that's really it.
Hank, final thoughts from you.
Well, be objective. If you're a reporter, keep your damn opinions to yourself and report the news. If you're a columnist, it's different. But back when I started, there was a distinct line between opinion columnists and reporters. And reporters, your basic job was to deliver the facts in a coherent fashion and be balanced, present both sides of the story. You don't see that anymore. I mean, everybody's on a team. It's crazy. It's become a sport, journalism. I also, picking up on what Filip said, I think the quality is less important now than the amount of hits you get on the internet. And he's right. I mean, whatever you mentioned, and Taylor Swift and all of one. So, well, anytime I mentioned Tiger Woods in this, well, of course, it didn't matter what I wrote. you know, okay, Tiger Woods. So there you go. Everybody's clicking on to see whatever, and that it didn't matter. And the funny thing was, and I said this when I left. Michael Kay had me on the day we were all laid off the Daily News, and I said to him, I said, the sad thing for me is that it doesn't matter what you write anymore. It doesn't matter. It matters what's in the headline on the story on the internet and whether they click on it, because that's how they sell their advertising now. It doesn't matter that they read the first paragraph and stopped reading the story, or that someone, you know, on something that's less sensational, something that's not Tiger Woods, and that you have a great story and that they read to the end of it. No, it's just how many people clicked that on. And I think that really something was lost there. When we had, I'm going on and on, but this is important to me. When you opened up a newspaper, right? And you went from the back to the front, right? You read the entire newspaper. You didn't look at it and say, "Oh, I'm reading this," and that's it, right? Or okay, you read it differently. You absorb the newspaper. You do not absorb the internet, the website. You don't absorb it. And I think that's lost. That's why I said at the beginning, I got in at the right time and out at the right time. I don't know what's going to happen in journalism, but I don't like the direction it's taking. I don't like the team aspect of it now, whether it's left or right. There's very few people who are just coming through down the middle. And I know there's opinions, and that's fine, commentaries, but actual journalism, I don't know how much of it's taking place anymore. So that's my, and also I will go back to my original statement when you brought out Lehrer's rules. Be true to your conscience and use common sense.
All right, before I pass it back to Charlie, I'll offer just some final thoughts as well. While I agree with a lot of everyone's thoughts on the state of journalism, here is my message to every member of NASJA. Keep the faith. Write with a passionate, observant, and original voice. We are blessed. Our sport is one of the only two sports in which there is so much camaraderie that you can genuinely feel it palpably. Every time you go out to the ski area, you come back with 10 friends. And not only do we write about the sporting events, we write about the people who make our sport great. So write with emotion, okay? Elevate the craft because the reader will come with you. I know a lot of people want to race to the bottom, and I know a lot of people want to get clicks. But if you write a good, thoughtful think piece, they will read it. So, as I said before, that's what it means to be a journalist. That's the commitment we expect, and all of you can deliver it. Charlie, final word's yours.
I just want to thank you, Jay, for putting this together. And all of our panelists. This is exactly the function that we had hoped to serve, which is educating. I think also NASJA can be proud of the fact that it is following through on its two main principles, which is to protect the rights of reporters and journalists to report and to earn a living. And we're going to keep doing that. And I will end with a great meme and cartoon that's been going around that I've seen a few times, and I just love it because it so sums up what we do. It's a photo of a journalist standing there and saying, "First they came for the journalists, and we don't know what happened after that." That's what we're about, making sure that never, ever happens. So thank you all. And we will be in touch with all of you to let you know when the next one of these professional development seminars will be held, probably next month. And again, our most heartfelt thanks to you guys for taking the time to speak with us today.